Definitely, sir. Let me just get in touch with Mr. Arpit. He is also to join us for the discussion. Just give me a moment.
So, Mr. Tomás, how was the wedding?
Well, the wedding was very, very nice. A lot of people. Well, they are now. Well, my son is in Sri Lanka, in Maldives as well. During the honeymoon, he went to Sri Lanka, to the same place where we were, well, 2 years ago. And then, no, I didn't give the idea. They found by themselves. And yes, and then they went. Okay.
Maldives is beautiful.
Yeah. Yeah, and yeah, there were a lot of people, but they invited a lot of friends. So it was really a big festivity here with no COVID. And we had also some friends, which was good. And yeah, and then well, last week we went to Romania with Peter and I Camp and Gabriela. And yes, and next week, I think in the 1st and 2nd of November, we'll have a meeting here in Ponta Delgada, in the other island. So it's moving again. And in India, how things are going now? The COVID, the pandemic is getting better.
Yeah, it is definitely better. But we are expecting another, wave after the festivals are over. Because in Kolkata, like the Durga Puja, 5 days of festivities, it was very crowded and lots of people outside. Nobody following the generally the mask and distance and all that.
Okay. Peter and I Camp told me that if we would suggest to move your Congress from December to January. Are you aware of this suggestion?
No. I didn't.
Okay. Peter and I come eventually, but of course that depends on you.
Yeah, we can.
This meeting in okay.
So, are you going to China? That's confirmed. Is that confirmed?
Well, he told me that he talks every week with Chinese, but they are very worried about this pandemic. So, and the rules are changing. What they expect is that China will follow the rules of the United States that will open in the 1st of November. And so eventually it will be possible for this group to go to Shenzhen in China on the 2nd and 3rd of December. And then of course we'll be there in the east, and eventually can pass through Mumbai or through Kolkata.
Yeah, that was the initial plan.
Yeah, but I don't know. Well, we never know about these Chinese, but because they depend, they are very centralized, so we don't know what is the decision. Well, let's see. But anyway, I sent you, I think, an email related with this information about the timing. But of course, it's up to you to decide.
Absolutely.
Okay. Okay. We must speak slowly because otherwise the sound falls in the ocean.
Well, I did try to reach out to Mr. Arpit, but he seems to be unreachable. But I think we can go ahead with our discussion. In the meanwhile, I believe Mr. Arpit and others will be joining in. But before that, I would like to take the opportunity to Mr. Stavak as well. Good afternoon to you, sir. Happy to see all the panelists here. And it gives me immense pleasure that today we'll be talking on railway transportation in South Asia, amidst the presence of the prominent experts in the field. So that's something that I'm looking forward to. So without further ado, I welcome to today's panel discussion on railway transportation in South Asia. We have amongst us some of the most prominent experts in the field of railway policy and railway research. I take this opportunity to welcome Professor Tomás. Professor Tomás is a professor of regional, environmental, and agriculture economics at the University of Azores, Portugal, and is the director of a regional cooperation research program at the South Asia Democratic Forum, a Brussels-based think tank. Dr. Dentinho is also the editor-in-chief of the Journal of Regional Science Policy and Practice. Welcome to you, Professor.
Oh,
I Thank you so much, Professor. I also take this opportunity to welcome Professor Sumana Bandyopadhyay, who is a professor at the Department of Geography of University of Calcutta. She specializes in geography, regional and environmental planning. She is presently the president of the Indian Regional Science Association. Her present research areas are urban public space, neoliberal urban transformations, ecological resilience, and urban heritage. Her publications are largely in the field of urban studies. A warm welcome to you, ma'am. I'm happy to have you here amongst us. Thank you, ma'am. We have amongst us Dr. Saptarshi Mitra. He is the assistant professor at the Department of Geography and Disaster Management of the University of Tripura in Agartala, India. He is the coordinator of the Regional Planning and Urban and Rural Development Laboratory and a researcher on the projects in the field of planning and development. Sir comes with a rich experience in the field of railway transportation risk-based research. And it is indeed my pleasure to welcome you amidst the audience, sir, amidst the panelists. Thank you so much for joining in, sir. I take this opportunity to welcome Mr. Hugo, who is the Faculty of Sciences and Technology at the University of Nova Lisbon. And he has written on the Portuguese railways in the colonial perspective. And Portuguese railways is one of his forte of expertise. Thank you so much, sir, for joining us on a weekend. Glad to have you here with us, sir. And we have amongst us Starbuck Roy, Mr. Starbuck Roy, who works as a doctoral researcher at the Regional Planning and Urban and Rural Development Laboratory, Department of Geography and Disaster Management, Tripura University. He conducts research on railway geography, railway infrastructure, planning and management, and transport planning and tourism. A warm welcome to you, sir.
Thank you.
And last but not the least, I'm Chitresh Shrivastva, and I am one of the contributing authors to the edited volume, that is Railway Transportation in South Asia. I am a PhD scholar at Jain deemed to be university in the field of public policy, and my area of interest relate to domestic and global railway policies. I'm also a non-resident fellow expert in railway and critical transportation at GPI, and me and Mr. ARPIT Chaturvedi, the co-founder of GPI, will be heading the discussion for the day. He shall be joining us soon, but in the meanwhile, we can start with our discussion. So, Professor Thomas, here is my first question to you. Professor, as you were thinking on this particular topic of railway transportation in South Asia, and as you cover in the edited volume, what motivated your team to look upon railways as a as an academic venture, something which not a lot of, say, researchers or students research about? So what was that one motivating factor or contributing factor that made the editorial board go for something as, I would say, as rigorous and as intriguing as railways? So your thoughts on that, Professor?
well, thank you very much. First of all, this was very much a challenge by Saptarshi and by Starbuck and also Professor Sumana to build up this volume, following others that we did for related with the South Asia Democratic Forum, and that received the great help of Elizabeth in trying to format the different values. But yeah, on the other hand, what the interest for me is that somehow it is related to regional science, which is about human interaction, the study of human interaction within space, and of course for human interaction, railways, roads, networks, and so on, conurbation, cities, as a major role. On the other hand, I'm relatively old. We have this idea, this experience that on one hand, railways are very important, are somehow the creators in the 19th century of internal seas, of internal ports. So without formally during when most of the traffic was done by the sea, you had 1 kilometer of inland was similar to 32 kilometers by on land, no, on the sea. So of course the centrality is when due to the sailing winds were completely different, when it was possible finally to have the railway station, railway networks that allowed all the continents, allowed the creation of North America, of Siberia and Russia, and also the further integration of the Indian continent. And that's, of course, created a big challenge for many countries, and allowed these a different style, a different type of governance in these major countries like United States, India, Russia, and China. The same way, we have to, on the other hand, we also notice through this development that railways, in fact, change the centrality of places somehow, and destroy and disaggregate the former conurbations that exist. So, for instance, if you look at Goa, that we know a little bit better, the design of the railway network into Murmugao, into the new port, somehow, and not to Panaji, somehow reduce the importance of Panaji as capital, and the possibility to create more agglomeration economies in this part of the world. And that happens also in other places around the world, where the establishment of railway networks are so powerful that if they don't if they don't respect former centralities, of course, they can create disaggregated cities, or more, that cannot benefit from the. Also, another point that seems to me interesting, that what is discussed in this book, is that, for instance, in Barcelona, and also from what we saw in Kolkata, the metro railway was somehow disconnected, and that is almost on purpose, in order to keep the society, or the social mixed, a little bit detached. So you have the metro in the new areas that are not disconnected, more or less disconnected with the former areas, and also in Barcelona you have a metro line that does not follow the usual, the diagonal, the main road in Barcelona, which somehow was on purpose, because in the middle of that big avenue there was people that were not interested in having the metro line close to them, because it will bring different accessibilities to other points. So I think nowadays with the one other point is that metro networks were based to control, as we have seen in our my colleague Hugo Pereira in design of these networks in Africa and in Goa. They were very much connected with the exploitation of natural resources, with the control by colonial powers of the hinterlands of the places where they had influence, and also related with somehow the boundaries, so a way to protect the boundaries. That we see, but it is enough to see the network design to understand that, for instance, in India, and the railway in India go to Tripura around Bangladesh, and eventually there are many connections related with Pakistan that are not there. And so this on one hand is a reality, on the other hand, it is a challenge. It is even more a challenge when railways are coming through with the globalization, because there is a lot of weight and people to transport. On one hand, there is more weight, more cargo to transport. On the other hand, there are problems of air traffic congestion in more dense places like Central Europe and India and China, and then these high-speed railway appears to become more needed and more. So I think that it's the volume proposed by our colleagues in Tripura is very interesting, because it is on one hand it connects to history, on the other hand and geography, but on the other hand also it highlights the problems that we will face in the future, and the challenge that we do also not to commit the same mistakes as we did. Finally, I just want to say one point. Well, in the 19th century, there were a lot of railways in Portugal and all over that were not feasible. It was just a way. They think that somehow the development will come just by creating these links. And that did not happen in Portugal, in the interior of Portugal. That not happened in many lines. And then the countries became bankrupt because it is a very expensive expenditure. Cost is very high cost. And that is still the mistake that we commit in urban sprawling and also in network sprawling. For instance, there are railways, high-speed railways in Spain that are completely empty, and it's a lot of cost. It has no benefit at all. And of course, Spain lost this money and did not invest in other more viable infrastructures or investments. So I think this is a very important mistake that theoretically I would like to raise, because somehow the states, the administration, the state tries to have this idea that the average cost should equal to the average benefit, and therefore everybody must have access to railways or to roads or to whatever, and then even this last link is paid by all. It means that you build this last link, will be empty, okay, and then the country will be on debt, well, impossible to. And that is a mistake, that we take things, the pharaohs and the Romans, that we build assuming that the average cost equals to the average benefit, differently from what the Germans do, and that's why they are eventually more rich, because they say they have a very interesting rule which calls cameralism, cameralism in the 18th century, that somehow a road is only built if the traffic on that specific road pays the road. Means that a link in the railway should always be only be linked if that particular link, that new station can pay this last link to some place. And that's eventually not true in many links. Of course, India is very rich, so it will be naturally fulfilled. But anyway, it is better to make the calculations and in the right way, so that we can have this network grow while being being possible to be paid. Otherwise, we'll lost money and there are not many resources. Finally, that was said by my father. Well, look, son, around the railways there is always ruins, and in fact there is around the railway tracks, because railway tracks, although they create a connection in one direction, they create a barrier in other direction. And therefore, we must be very careful of these barriers that are created. On one hand, the result is that this corridor of ruins along the lines, because of the impact of the railway, and on the other hand, because it is poor land in most in the cities, it tends to be occupied by slums and so on. So that is a side effect that must be considered and taken care, well, with the passage above and below and so on. So that's all these things that we learn from the environmental impact assessment statements are very important in order to have the more efficient railways. So yes, I think we should learn a lot with the 100 years past that we have, and see what are the railways that created, in fact, a very good impact. What are the railways that detached, that destroyed, avoid agglomeration economies in cities of average size, those that created new towns but without proper planning, and so it becomes like towns that are not necessarily in the right place, and that's the challenge. We notice, just to explain, for instance, in the United States, the towns that never lost their importance were the towns that the Franciscans and the Indians located in the right place. The towns brought by railway in the north of the United States, somehow they lost importance, so they were not sustainable. So the location of the railway should respect these former towns, the former locations of the horse and the walking, because these are the more sustainable places. So the sustainable places in the earth, within the city or between cities, they are very precise. If you build a city in the other side of the river, it's a completely different image. So that we must understand the story of places, and those that in fact have a long-term sustainability, and not destroy these places. Try to challenge, okay, we are going to have a railway, but we must go to this place. We must not create a place elsewhere, because then you lose the potential of the place, long-term potential of the place. And this is not because space is not flat, and there are diversities, and there are rivers and boundaries and mountains and so on. These places are relatively precise, and we must not try to disentangle them with, for instance, well, in the United States, you have cancer cities created artificially by road networks and also by railway networks, okay, that competes with St. Louis, which is a natural place. But of course, then you have two cities that somehow are competing in different ways, but one of them will lose to the other in the future. So it's the challenge not to respect the vocation of places, and we know that from geography, from landscape design, and so on, and from the historical evolution of those places. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Professor. I think a lot of insights and a lot of discussions that will be following. And in fact, some of the keywords that Professor Tomás rightly pointed out with regards to planning and the accessibility to places which are rich in resources, and especially reaching out to populations, about how railway has evolved from a colonial period to a post-globalization period. That kind of brings me to a question to Professor Sumana. Ma'am, there is one question that I have in this context. When you look at the urban setting, as Sir spoke about urban planning, how feasible or how viable do you think are today's metro alignments, considering that the Indian cities have been rapidly expanding with the migration of people from the less privileged cities, meaning to say those cities where the opportunity, at say metropolitan cities like Bangalore, or when we look at Kolkata, or when we look at Delhi, what do you think is one of the misses that the planners of urban transportation are not looking into? Is there any gap that you see in planning the reach of metro networks across metropolitan cities? Your thoughts on this?
Yeah, if you're talking only about the metro, it's definitely just one sector. But definitely one thing that comes to my mind first regarding the metro is that look, Indian cities, if you look at the largest metropolitan cities, that's Delhi, Mumbai, Bangalore, Chennai, and Kolkata. Definitely, one of the key reasons why the metro is very, very vital here is the way in which people can move much more easily within within the urban sphere, within the urban region. Because obviously, when we look at home to work, kind of networks, the linkages between residential areas and workplaces, home to workplace. When we look at these linkages, definitely metro is one of the key important contributions it makes because of the speed of travel. Now, there are two issues here. One is the construction of the metro railway. That aspect is one aspect, and the other is the pricing of the cost of tickets, etc. Now, when we look at because you did mention migration of population, there are several levels in which this migration takes place. Now, there are migration in terms of, say, for example, the IT sector in Bangalore or Hyderabad, and the informal sector in Kolkata. If you compare the two, definitely the number of people who are migrating into Kolkata or the number of people who are migrating into Bangalore, and if you look at the profiles, the economic profiles, or look at the kind of what kind of livelihood linkages are associated with it, you will find that there is a vast difference. Because for the informal sector, which dominates Kolkata as a city, and say for example the IT sector or other kind of highly skilled workers who are moving into Bangalore, for example, migrating into Bangalore to serve the IT sector or the financial sectors, there is a difference. Now, metros in one way they are they provide that connectivity, uh, and it's crucial because primarily the metro network sort of feeds the CBD with the links the CBD with the kind of peripheral areas, but not too much peripheral. It does not link to the suburban areas. So that's one of the issues because it's one of the major issues as an urban geographer. I would like to mention that since there is a depopulation, we do know about a depopulation from the CBDs in most of these cities. So, is the metro railway network really helping the periphery in the sense that the peri-urban or the suburban areas, from where the direction of movement, the direction of the concentration of population is now reversing. There is a reversal in that direction. Definitely, see the metros are never running empty. There is a huge demand. But is there the question is that is there a need for the metros also to expand towards a little towards the peripheries because these are the actual regions from where the population reversal is taking place. Now, whatever migration is taking place now in Kolkata, for example, is the location of those people are primarily in the peripheral areas, not within the city. So they are located in Goria and where the southern and northern extensions, peripheral extensions, where the metro railway network is now expanding to. See, the need has arisen, right? It was initially just the CBD and the surrounding of the CBD that was connected. And now the main requirement is to connect the CBD to the suburbs, to the peripheries. So now the peripheries are becoming part of the proper urban area, and this linkage is now happening. But what is important to look at is the other part of the story is the environmental issues. Now, so far as environment is concerned, we do know about the extensions. For example, in Kolkata, the extensions are not towards the eastern region. Definitely, the eastern region is not largely affected because the wetlands are there, the river system is there, the lake ecosystem is there. So these are challenging areas. Apart from the fact that there is a lot of land acquisition problem which will emerge as and when you try to expand this network, because this network, the expansion of this network was not that much pre-planned, so it's evolving as we go. Right. For example, the initial metro plan was only from a certain point to a certain point, and as peripheries start growing and the population starts shifting to the peripheries, and the newer migrants start locating themselves in the peripheries, we will be looking at a problem. We will be looking at a time when again another plan for another level of extension, hierarchy of extension is required. But at that point of time, what kind of environmental problems do we have? Are we going to affect the lakes or wetlands and all these areas? How are we going to, sort of plan around these, natural regions, natural ecological regions? This is one of the most important. There was one book on town planning when I was working for my PhD. My work was concentrating on urban wetlands in Kolkata, the East Calcutta wetlands. I found one of the town planning books on town planning, talking about a very successful plan that would, I mean, a very successful plan would be that which talks about building infrastructure around the ecosystems, building around ecosystems, not through, not by converting the ecosystems, not by running through the ecosystems. For example, now what we are seeing right now in Kolkata is the metro railway extension is taking place. Subhash Sarovar is one of the largest man-made lakes in Kolkata. It has been crucially affected. So there are parks have gone, natural areas have gone, lakes are going, ponds are going. So that kind of issue is, I think, one of the most key important things that needs to be looked at from the view of planners. Because an urban planner and a transport planner can never, take decisions which are unsustainable. At the end of the day, we are talking about sustainability. Like Professor Dentino pointed out, that sustainability is one of the important issues. And to plan, whether it's transport planning or any other infrastructure planning, we need to keep that in mind, that there is going to be the future of development of infrastructure will require the linking of the core areas to the peripheral areas, because that is where the population is going to be located in times to come. So the depopulation of the CBD area and also the new migrants coming in to settle, or even in fact because of high levels of pollution, rising costs, as and when people will, for example, the huge government sector. If you look at the government sector, the employees are all located, their residences are provided by the government. But once they retire, they're going to look for options which are easily accessible, financially accessible. So when you buy property for your retirement home or whatever, it is always going to be the periphery. So the entire movement outward movement from the city core to the periphery is one part. Those are already located in the city, locating themselves when they have their own property, they will tend to go to the periphery. New migrants coming in, they're also locating in the peripheries because of the high cost of properties here within the city. So it may not be very relevant for Kolkata because the land prices are not all that high. But for Mumbai, just imagine Vasai Virar. If you look at Vasai Virar in Mumbai, Vasai Virar was a completely creek land basically. It was an ecosystem, natural ecosystem, and that has completely converted to a residential zone because of simply the affordability question that arose. So it has taken 10, 15, last 10, 15, 20 years, 10, 15 years. The focus of development has been these areas which have been given over to development. So the transport network also needs to connect. So Mumbai is a very efficient city. We are all aware of that. In Mumbai, when Vasavira was developed, there was a land contestation issue. Again, I was interested in it because it's creek land and wetland. So I went into studying the analytical parts of the locational analytics. But what we found finally is that it was the Western Railway branch that extended up to Vasai Virar, and the minute that station was ready, there was a complete network of the buses, local buses and auto rickshaws which would take you from the railway station into the interior parts of the Vasai Virar region, and rapid development of the residential sector took place. Now Vasai Virar is as good as Thane or any other place which is much closer to the CBD of Mumbai. So it's very well developed, very well connected. Networks have been established. But what have we lost? Now, because of the railway construction, railway extension, not much of the creekland has been lost. But the residential development is definitely going to affect these ecosystems. So we need to link the transport connectivity, metro railway construction. We'll definitely need to look at the ecosystem. For example, if you look at Kolkata, the recent extensions that have been taking place in Kolkata, several, very urgent issues cropped up when this expansion was taking place. Because it was basically, people did not know where the drainage network is, where the canals are located. The railway authorities, the metro railway authorities, just found barrier after barrier in terms of the ecosystem. They were suddenly digging and they suddenly found that this is not an area which should be, which is maybe an area which is geologically very sensitive, because after all it's a deltaic city. One needs to remember that a deltaic city which is still an evolving delta. So we need to, when you go for underground constructions, there's so many things to look at. So it's a very, very complex issue, especially the metro railway network, because you're going underground and you're going to build an entire system, which is a very, very vast, construction mechanism, which is linking the entire, linking entire neighborhoods within and outside the city. So I think the challenges are multiple. It's not just one. Multiple challenges. Very difficult to sort of sum up everything. But there are too many issues. Really, if you talk about the metro railways, to be looked at from the point of view of commerce. For example, they have to look at the demographics. They have to look at the viability and efficiency. Of course, it will be very viable. Like Professor Thomas was saying, the high-speed trains in Spain are empty most of the time. If here also, if you look at high-speed trains, if the ticket prices are very high, it will also run empty maybe. Even in India with a high density of population, it depends on the pricing again. But local trains, what we are talking about, metro railway that you have highlighted really for this discussion. Metro means within the city and it does not go beyond the city limits mostly. Even in even in Paris or other large cities of the world, you will find metros limited to a small area. So I really don't mind. Maybe it's again a question of viability there also. Why just to travel to Versailles, which is very close by, you need to take a train. You cannot take a metro. So this question is there, but if you want to really improve the accessibility, I think some part of the peripheral areas should also come in, and also look at the ecological and other considerations that are there, especially in cities like Kolkata. This may not be true for Bengaluru, or it may not be true for Chennai, for example, because of the geologic condition. So as a geographer, we may say that the geological conditions should be looked at, ecosystems should be looked at, the spatiality should be looked at, demographics should be looked at. We highlight so many points. But when it goes to the transport planner, the key core areas, do they only look at engineering aspects or they also look at these questions? That's basically going to be the crux of the problem in a holistic manner. That is. Thank you.
Thank you so much, ma'am. I think we got a lot of keywords that I think each of them will individually be a long topic to discuss on, be it in terms of connectivity, be it in terms of the central business district, be it the peripheries. And of course, as you rightly pointed out, even as I would like to personally point out that in Bangalore, now the metro is slowly moving outwards towards the peripheral areas. When you look at areas like Kangeri, when you look at areas like Devanhalli, these are all towards the periphery of Bangalore. So by and large, also because the cost of accommodation in the areas that are suburbs, basically they are lesser, so that's where it's also pushing the people to move beyond the center part of the city to the peripheral parts. And by and large, also the coming up of airports and the need for facilitating faster connectivity to airports is also another factor where the metro planners or the transport planners are looking at connecting the airports to through metro, so that people can save on the fuel and the carbon emissions that are emitted in the due course of commuting. As anyways, we know that the aviation sector is the largest contributor to the greenhouse gas emissions, while railways comparatively is more environmental friendly and fuel efficient, because we have other alternatives as well to operate the railways. So I think these all are very important points and something that will be coming on in the due course of the discussion. Thank you so much for the inputs, ma'am. And I, I would now like to bring in Mr. Hugo. Mr. Hugo, you have spoken in your chapter about the colonial perspective of the railways, and something that even Professor Tomás has been tracing the evolution of railways too. So could you give us a brief idea of how has been the chronology of the railways in Portugal from the colonial period to the post-globalization period, and how has it impacted the demand for rail travel, given that we are now seeing a boost in the aviation sector? So has it had any impact in Portugal as such? Your thoughts on this?
Well, good morning to you all. Thank you, Chitresh, for the invitation, and thank you, Tomás, for the invitation to participate in the edited volume. I think it was a very pleasant enterprise for myself, and I hope it will be profitable for future researchers. Regarding your question, well, construction in Portugal began in the middle of the 19th century in the mainland Portugal in the 1850s. It was meant to, it was part of a program to modernize the kingdom and bring it closer to its European counterparts. That program was then moved or transferred to the colonies in the late 1870s, early 1880s. And the goal here was also to modernize and to develop the colonies, but it also had a political and diplomatic goal, which was to prove that Portugal had enough resources and expertise to develop the colonies. As you know, there was the scramble for Africa, there was the scramble for the colonies, and Portugal had to prove that it could also develop the colonies as other countries like Britain or France or Belgium and other countries that had overseas domains. Now, these developments or these constructions, they developed through many decades. The first railway construction began actually in Goa, in India. It was the first. It was one of the first railways to be built in the Portuguese colonies. But most of the work was done in Africa. Portugal had a claim to a larger portion of land in Africa, whereas in India, Portugal was restricted to small enclaves on the coast of India, as well, most of the Indian territory was under British rule, and in Africa, Portugal had an opportunity to increase. We had a larger claim to larger portions of land, and therefore that shows in the maps. One of the maps that I put on the chapter shows that the length of the railways built in the African colonies of Portugal was much larger than in India. This is my take on the chapter was, or my perspective was from the concept of railway imperialism, which was a very customary use or customary goal sought by other imperial powers in their own colonies, in which or by which they would build the railways, they would supply the rolling stock, they would supply the rails, they would supply the expertise and the goals of modernization and the goals of bringing development to the colonies and to the local populations were often overtaken by goals of extracting resources from those colonies. And so railway imperialism, even though it was disguised as a token of progress, in the end, it ended up by favoring more the interests and the agendas of those that touted, that promoted railway investment rather than the local populations. Portugal here was in the, well, it was in a different position, as it was also a promoter of railway imperialism, but it was also a victim, considering that Portugal didn't have any capacity to build rolling stock nor rails, and it didn't have enough money to invest and to build those railways. So it had to rely and it had to depend on supplies of capital, of financial and industrial capital from abroad, thus increasing the dependency on other more powerful nations, like especially Britain. The operation of these lines, and this meets what Professor Tomás said a while ago. The operation of these lines, well, overall, it wasn't very profitable, and it wasn't very, from an economic point of view, it wasn't very rewarding and very efficient. There were some exceptions. For instance, the Lourenço Marques railway in southern Mozambique that connected the city of Lourenço Marques, nowadays Maputo, with South Africa. Those that railway was very profitable, but it was an exception. Most of the railways were not profitable at all. For instance, one of the major financial disasters of the Portuguese finance in the 19th century was the railway in Ambaca in Angola, from Luanda to Ambaca. It was a complete financial disaster. Portugal had to pay thousands of pounds to the company as a guarantee of yield, and the rewards, the revenues that it brought, financial and economical, were very low, very little. And something similar happened in Goa, in Mormugao, as Portugal gave or considered a guarantee of yield to the promoters of the railway, to the company that the railway. This means that the railway had the company had its profit guaranteed, regardless of the traffic. And the truth is that when the railway was built, the traffic, instead of merging towards Goa and towards the harbor at Mormugao, it was diverted to Bombay. The companies that surrounded Goa, they increased the fares towards Mormugao, they decreased the fares towards Bombay, and therefore traffic was negligible in the Portuguese line. This was not just a matter of well, back then in the 19th century they said, oh, it's the British, they want to harm us, as they always do. But this was more the case of an economic and financial perspective, or economic and financial greed or ambition, if you like, because it was far more profitable for these companies to increase traffic in their own lines rather than just to send them to a competing line in a foreign country. Even though for economic agents in the region could be more profitable to have a shorter route towards the sea, but for those companies that operated railways in British India, it was more profitable to increase the traffic in their own lines. So this state of things kept going for many decades, and only in the 1920s so this line was built opened in 1888, if my memory serves me right, and Portugal had to pay the guarantee of yield in full until the 1920s. So 20 years after the inauguration of the line and the port, Portugal had already paid more to the company than what the harbor and the railway had cost. So it was a tremendous financial disaster for Portugal, with little to with actually dire consequences on India, because the stipulations in the treaty, some stipulations in the treaty harmed the Goan economy. For instance, the salt production, which had to be cancelled or diminished, was one of the stipulations of the treaty between Portugal and India to build the railway. And the railway in India and in the African colonies of Portugal, they illustrate well something that some authors like John Casson, for instance, called the technical sublime. And the technical sublime is just the devotion that man has for technology, the faith in the technical fix. And in Portugal, in this time, this notion was so embedded in the Portuguese decision makers, in policy makers, that they didn't look at costs when it came to instating a railway in their territories. And this the Goan territory shows how this notion of progress based on technology ended up by bringing more harm than good to the Portuguese colony. And it's something that it still lives on still today, where we can see that sometimes we make decisions not because they will be more rewarding, but because they will bring more technology, or they are based in modern technology, and they will show that they will act as tokens of progress, of modernity, regardless of their economic or financial impact in Portuguese and not only Portuguese society or economy. But you asked me also about the consequences on the long term and the chronology on the long term of these infrastructure in Portugal. So like I said, some railways were more or less profitable, others they weren't as much. But the truth is that they kept operating for many decades, well, until Portugal lost its empire. The Goan railway it kept operating in the Portuguese colony of Goa until India took Goa back from Portugal, and the line was incorporated in the Indian railways, in the Indian railway system. The railway which was built in narrow gauge, so in metric gauge, well, the distance between rails, as you know, it was regauged for the Indian standard, which, by the way, is the same as the Portuguese standard. It's 1 meter and 67 centimeters, if I'm not mistaken. And it was incorporated in the Indian railway system. And well, as far as I know, it has been quite profitable, and it has been traffic in the line has been quite successful. Especially for touristic purposes, if my information is correct. As far as in the African colonies, the railways were also part of the imperial project, well until the fall of the regime in 1974, and the subsequent independence of the colonies in 1975 and 1976. These structures, they were very harmed by the civil war in those colonies that followed the independence. Most of them were destroyed in some parts. I think that the exception was a railway in Angola that connected the harbor of Benguela to Zaire, to the neighboring country of Zaire. And this was because the line was so important to bring into transporting ore from Zaire to the coast, that none of the fighting parts in the civil war wanted to destroy it, because it was important for both. But for the remainder, they were pretty much, many sections were destroyed, but now they are resurfacing, they are re-emerging as they were rebuilt by the Angolan authorities using Chinese and Indian capital. Some lines are being brought back to life with more modern features, more modern stations, with a route that's different from the original route, but it's more efficient, it's quicker. It hasn't got as many curves and as many steep inclines, and therefore it became a better infrastructure. But my point is that it's a structure that is still important, so that's still considered relevant and crucial to the now the Angolan and the Mozambican economies as a critical infrastructure, which is, and to end my intervention, I'd like to speak about these railways as critical infrastructures. These are critical infrastructures are those structures that are considered key to very different points in society and in economy, in finance, in diplomacy, and whatnot. And they're considered that their failure can bring can harm not only the economy they are working in, but also adjacent systems that are working in tandem with these structures, with this infrastructure. And it was and maybe it was also and this was also viewed as critical infrastructure throughout this period, from the colonial times to present day, when these infrastructures are now part of independent countries. And this is what I wanted to say today. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, sir. I think you bring very critical points, and something that has been echoed by Professor Tomás, Professor Sumana. Considering that some countries are geographically vibrant than others, railway also becomes a challenging infrastructure to build based on the geographical variance across different countries, and something that we see within the South Asian region itself. As we move on, I would like to welcome ARPIT, sir, the founder of Global Policy Insights. He has just joined us. Welcome to you, sir.
Thank you so much, Chitresh. And first of all, my apologies. As I told you, I am a little under the weather, and hopefully it's not dengue, which is spreading quite a lot in my city of Firozabad. But it is such a pleasure being here. And I absolutely think that this is a topic that we are super interested in at Global Policy Insights, because as a think tank, we really think that a policy which is related to critical infrastructure such as railways, and I was hearing Hugo speak that how railways was such a critical element of empire building earlier, and now I believe that railways is a critical fundamental ecosystem to build democracies, building nations, and ensuring greater economic development of countries like India. And as Hugo is just mentioning that in a country like India, even now, and Chitresh and I have been discussing about this quite a lot, that railways is the transportation of choice for especially the lower middle economic segment, as well as the poorer segments of the country. Now, of course, there are new innovations, and with high-speed railways and a lot of better services. Of course, some bit of it is catering to the middle and upper middle class as well. but we have interacted with bureaucrats, discussing for umpteen number of hours and trying to understand how railways can improve low-cost transportation services for the lower the lower middle or the poorer economic segments. And I think for a country which seeks to develop as a global superpower, uh, transportation and the economies of transportation, they matter a lot. If I were to talk in comparative terms, India still, and we are doing some research on the micro, small, and medium industries in India, MSMEs as we call it. And one big factor of the moderate success of MSMEs in India is because you can get from point one to point two over long distances at cheaper costs. But at the same time, studies show that the cost of transportation and the efficiencies and time taken in transportation in India is much lower than, let's say, China. It's almost twice as lower, which means that half as slow and double as expensive as China. And when you say that, that has been positively correlated by the growth of the MSME sector. So the reason why China is doing better than India on that account also points towards the direction that China's industrial sector is doing a lot better. And similarly, India's micro, small, and medium scale industries could be improved if we are able to make substantial improvements in the railway sector. And as to how we do that, there are obviously a number of challenges, but the opportunity is huge. And I'm here to learn from all of the great speakers who are here, and looking forward to hearing more views on this. So, and I think now we have Professor Sumana, we have a number of other professors, Professors Tabak Roy, etc., who would be able to throw some light maybe in the question answer session on how do we deal with some of the challenges of the Indian railway sector. But back to you, Chitresh. Thank you.
Thank you so much, sir, for your insights. Now, given that sir has raised a very important point with regards to the MSMEs and how railways can play an important role here, I believe Starbucks sir and Saptrishi sir will be able to throw a little more light, will be able to add on a little more input to this with regards to the chapter on the freight transportation. So this is a question that I have for Starbucks sir and Saptrishi sir. So what do you think is the current scenario of freight transportation in India via railways? And how do you think can you further improve it? How do you think that we are at par with the global freight systems, global freight railway systems, or is it more that we need to catch up on? Your views, sir.
You can start.
Yes, sir.
There is a two perspective. One is that segment, targeting and positioning. You asked that whether we are at par the global standard or not. And in India, the 57% revenue come from the freight transportation, but maximum focus is given to the passenger transportation. So that's the main issue. But in China, that ARPIT already mentioned that China is provide much better services in entire Southeast Asia. They have better regional cooperation rather than India. But now India is focusing in railway diplomacy rather than the railway transportation, because India trying to develop railway connectivity with Bangladesh. Already India identified 8 link to be established to develop the future collaboration between Bangladesh, and then it will connect through Chittagong port to entire Southeast Asia. So it will have some future in near future India can develop. But initially India look into that the targeting, which market they are going to target in production. to finish product to marketing, the entire chain and the logistic market, India having the lacking in that thing. So India is trying to cover up all those things, economical development and all, but India does not have that much of production system to develop in near future. But especially in Northeast India, which where we are working on, there is a scope not only for the trade and commerce, but also strategic significance, because that area is about 98% surrounded by the foreign countries like China, Bangladesh, and Myanmar, like that. And that we divided into three things, that's called the railway diplomacy, by that the political issue, social, technological, and legal and environmental thing. Professor Thomas, Sumana Madam already mentioned about the economic and environmental issue, but there is a gap between policy and practices. Government taking the policy, but that is far beyond from the people. There is not connected with the people. What people demand, that is not concerning. That's the main issue why India lag behind in the policy implementation, because maximum cases in India policy in the top-down approach, not bottom-up approach. So that's the main issue for the Indian context, the why Indian policy is not success, because of the approaches come from the central. But when I made in 2016, that time our rail minister was Suresh Prabhu. I met him in Agartala railway station. So that time he mentioned that we don't have that integrated policy, so which connect that economy to transportation to development and social development. In Northeast, there is a many social issue. If there is no peace building, so we cannot develop all those things. And India and Bangladesh geopolitical relationship also important to develop the railway transportation. And if we can develop the geopolitical relationship, because railway play a crucial role in railway, but through the diplomacy and dialogue, it can resolve the regional cooperation. So we are working on it, that how the government take the policies and what people think about it, and the local people and the local politician, how they react with the plan, and how it is impacted to the social development, as well as by without violating the environmental thing. We all are making the policy, but this is the implementation. When coming to implementation, there is a many other issues, that is called the risk factor of the policy. So we have to look into those factors also. And come to the Chitresh question, whether our service quality as per the global standard. Sometimes it's yes, sometimes it's no, because we have a potentiality to operate the international freight, but we don't have that much of mindset as business attitude to the government side to control all those things. That's the main issue which is suffering by the Indian Railway. Sir, later part you will continue.
Okay, thank you, Stavo. Am I audible? Okay, thank you. This is a very interesting and but difficult questions to me. That Stavo already discussed that the government sector has its aim, but the efficiency or lack of efficiency is the major part, is the gap between the policy and the reality. Not only I think this is from the empirical study of my last 10 years, this is not only the lack of the government service, but also the private sectors are also not comparable to with the European or the American or the rest of the Asian countries. Because first of all, this is not the nation, because nowadays many times India is called nations. India not ever called the Europe like comparable to European nations. India is a country. So there is a very different approaches, and that railway development is very much related with the economic development. What is already discussed Hugo, Mr. Hugo and Professor Thomas, both the professors discussed this thing. The empowerment, development of railway empowerment still going on through the government policy. Because if you go through the economic policy after globalizations of India, 2002, the mineral resource policy of India, you can find out that all the reservoir of the mineral resources of India, that means that if you go through the Indian, the maps, that means the starting from the Chotanagpur Plateau to the, that is the Gujarat area, of all the major mineral resources are going through the process of exportization. So the money is coming to India. That means one-sided, if you go through, that means the bar graph is going up. That means the income is going towards India. But the huge sustainability of these mineral resources is going out to the European countries and the Americans. They are storing these mineral resources. So if you point out the development of the economy and development of the railway transport system in terms of the monetary gain, I think it is not create the sustainability, because India is not the, still now, not the capital intensive industry, incentive country. And this is a labor incentive country. And obviously the huge population is there. Sometimes you may call this the excess populations, because in this discussion last 1.5 years, the migration, discussion of migration, the labor migration from one place to another place related with the economy, the employment, that is, and the transportation through railway, all the local transport system is very important issues. And now after COVID situation, what happened? The general unreserved compartment is not there in the through the express trains. That is very significant changes come through the government policy. And that government policy, what Stovok is telling, that is not connected with the base level, the gap. Because the government think that the profit maximization is very important. And we found in the base level work, the privatization is going on in Indian Railways. Very rapidly changes the station wise, that is the counter, the selling of the, that is the tickets and the advertisement, everything slow, not slowly. The big jump is coming next 5 or 10 years if the government policy is going through that process. So the government policy is just like a privatization policy of the profit maximization. And in terms of the development, they are saying this is a development, this is a process of development. And the another side is the crores, the lakhs of populations are waiting for their livelihood with this based on or depending on this kind of railway transport system, because this is majorly the people, the general people are depending because of the cheap cost and time consuming. Both way, the railway system is much more important. So we have to think where we may close down, we may compromise, or we may settle down. That is the one side is that the demand of the global policy, the demand of the technology investment. Now talking about the high-speed railway system. So now this high-speed railway system, what is the effect of this high-speed railway system? Very, very compared to the demand of the huge mass population movement or the local population movement, because also this after the COVID situation, that is the local railway transport system is not going on. This is totally stopped. So that is very important. The people of the labor intensive populations, you are talking about the medium scale industries, how the peoples are going from one place to another places. Metro railway connections is only 6 and 7 metropolitan cities, the big metropolitan cities. But the other What about the rural development? What about the medium cities? That is very important. I think from my perspective, that is very important to, we can say that is the consider both the situation. One-sided, you have to challenge the development with China and the European countries. The another sided, you have to think about the people of India, the general people of India.
Chitresh, can I come in with a very small comment over here?
Definitely, sir. Please go ahead.
Sure. So thank you, Professor Mitra, for pointing that out. I was, in fact, just thinking when you said that the development should be focused on rural India as well as smaller cities. In our research on MSMEs, it also shows that the majority of the MSMEs, half of them are in rural India, a little more than half, 51% around, and even the ones that are there in urban India, majority of them are in tier 2, tier 3 cities. And I was just wondering that if you can quickly throw some light on this fact that typically for a layperson in India, railways are very well connected. That's the only mode of transportation, of national public transportation, that penetrates smaller cities as well as rural India. But if you could talk about whether that penetration is adequate, or to what extent is it inadequate, that would be extremely, extremely helpful. Perhaps it could be the case that it penetrates for passenger transport and not for freight transport. I don't know. I don't know the data over there. But it would be very helpful if you could throw some light on this aspect.
Both cases are there. Very important thing is for the freight transport system. You are talking about the questions regarding that is the internal market and internal movement, because is that medium scale industries or the small scale industries are for the local or regional level, or to support the major industries. And this is not the very good positions of the rural transport system through the railway transportation, because of the profit maximization process. Because if the railway companies is very much calculative, this is very normal. How much railway tickets per month are selling in the small, that is the railway stations, maybe the small town. Now the huge number of 2011 census towns are going on. Basically, these are the rural areas. Nomenclature has been transformed, but the characteristics is very much rural. So the per month selling tickets that do not reflect that there is a profit, that is the chances are there. So the planning, the process of for these kind of public transport system, railway transport system from the rural areas to the nearer urban area, or the long 1 or 2 hours long journey, is very nominal. So there should be a planning process. There is a chance for the planning process. Needs the empirical study, so that India, especially for India and many other third world countries, maybe there is a chance of this railway transportation system, so that the peoples easily can avail the urban facilities, especially for their livelihood, for the health services, for education purposes. Otherwise, they have to stay for long period of time in that urban area. Sometimes it is affordable for them, sometimes it is not beyond their affordability. So that is create a huge problem. And also that create the increase the density. Already Sumana Madam discussed about how the urbanization process changes because of the huge population pressures, and also environmental degradations is huge. That is my observation and suggestions. There is a huge scope to study that particular one if you are going to approach that one, not only thinking about the profit, but also the service, because ultimately what happened in my observation is that after establishment of the basic services of the railway system, both the general railway and the metro railway, then that the private companies are coming to negotiate that particular infrastructure facilities and taking this kind of that means the extra mileages of especially concentrated on the urban area because of the more market policies, more I can say that is the peoples are moving there. So that particular thing. So, but the basic infrastructure, the government that means involve the huge money nowadays, Northeast also, the other places also, West Bengal also, connectivity with Bangladesh also, they invested. But after that, what happened? The questions of the sustainability through the public sector or the private sector or the combinations of the public-private sector, that is a big issue for next future decades.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Professor Mitra. Dr. Roy, you want to say something?
In response to your question, Mr. ARPIT, so in Northeast, we have studied that we didn't found we apply the Ganser causality model that MSME or small medium scale development and relationship with railway, but we didn't found that any significant relationship of economic development, especially in terms of MSME and railway, because many northeastern states like Mizoram and Manipur, they are economically developed last 70 years. Their state domestic GDP is increasing, but their railway development is not developed that much. So there is not significant relationship between the railway transportation and MSME, which you refer in your research that MSME is maximum located in the rural area and whether railway is sufficient or not. But in Northeast India, that is not sufficient, especially except Tripura and Assam. The other 5 northeastern states is not sufficient railway transport system. And even in Tripura, there is a railway network, but there is a very lack of frequency of rail services. So that is one of the findings in our research, what we have found, that economic development have many other perspective, other issues. Railway always not play a crucial role, especially Northeast. We use the Ganser causality model and we found there is no such significant results. Thank you.
No, thank you so much. The only thing that I would just like to add over there is that I mean, obviously, we all know that there are pathways to development, right? There are, railways may neither be necessary nor be sufficient for development, but places where you find a better railway network, you find better performance of, the industrial sector, and especially, if it connects markets, not just in a particular sector, but then if the producer's market is connected with the consumer's market and that is facilitated, or the supply chains are facilitated by railways, it does lead to economic development. That may not be the only path. You can obviously pursue economic development from 10 other pathways. You could develop other sorts of infrastructure, of course, depending on the industry that you're in. But at least for the manufacturing based MSMEs, the railway development and the development of fundamental transportation infrastructure is one of the many pathways available. That's all I wanted to say.
I'm so sorry, I got disconnected and visible to everyone. Yes.
Okay, I think Chitresh has facing some network issues over here. let me see. So I just want to then check if we can open it out for the audience questions and answers, or if is there any member of the panel who wants to add to the discussion that we've had so far? Else we can just open it out to the audience. All right, so anybody in the audience? I see Smita, I see Nagendra, I see Tushar. Would you have any questions to ask? Yes, Smita, over to you.
Yeah, good afternoon to all of you. You're able to hear me?
Yes, you're audible, Smita.
Yes, yeah, thanks. This was a very insightful discussion. And myself, I'm affiliated with Jain University as an assistant professor. And then, incidentally or coincidentally, I'm also, like a guide for Chitresh. So that's how I'm, into this topic. And otherwise, also, like, it's a very interesting topic. It's especially the railways. So when you keep, referring to this issue of railways, I think now there's a point where we have reached. We are slowly and then steadily, especially in the developing countries, we are transitioning towards, incorporating this science and technology innovations into the infrastructure, especially the railways, where we are transitioning towards a more innovative ways of, introducing the railways as a high speed into the modes of, the high speed railways, or maybe the metro railways, which are, introduced and then already in which is implemented in many of the metropolitan cities in India. So here, one way to look at the this transition is to look at the perspective, the approach of the regional development, economic development, where Professor Hugo and the Professor Thomas also, they were pointing out. One way, it is one perspective is regional development, economic development, privatization, and also the innovations to be introduced into the infrastructure. Another mode of another aspect of understanding the railways, especially the new modes of the railway innovations, is to the privatization, as well as the spatial aspects of the region where these innovations are happening, especially Dr. Sumano and then our Indian the scholars they've come out with a host of the insights into the pros and cons of the railways that's happening here in India. So there are different the issues as far as the developing countries are concerned. The issues are socio-economic, the issues, especially the population, migration, the peripheral, the rural-urban divide, the aspects of rural-urban divide, and also the accessibility, affordability. So there are a number of components, the number of variables where we look into the railways, the modernization, the railway innovations are concerned, accessibility are concerned. So there are also another approach is to look into the spatial, the distribution, the spatial characteristics of this, the new, the railway implementation as far as the metro railways are concerned, as far as the high-speed railways are concerned, because these are all the new innovations in railway sector and infrastructure sector actually are embedded in what is called as the economic perspective, are embedded in privatization perspective, are embedded in what is called as a transit knowledge economy perspective. So here I wanted to know, especially in the especially in the context of what we refer to as a post-globalization, where the developing countries are are undergoing a phase of post-globalization or de-globalization also. Some of the academicians, their researchers, they refer to as a de-globalization phase. So what are the important the characteristics, or what are the important the factors, or the aspects where a scholar like Chitresh needs to understand and then develop his analytical the perspective or an approach into his the research. what are the critical, the factors or the critical aspects of this deglobalization or the post-globalization scenario, especially in developing countries. So there is a scenario of colonialism, colonial perspective, post-colonial perspective, but we have transitioning towards, we have entered into the phase of globalization and post-globalization or deglobalization. So under this phase, what are the important the factors that need to be considered as far as the scholars are concerned to look into this infrastructure, the huge the infrastructure like railways, which is a public good, as well as private the aspects that is incorporated into the infrastructure. To Hugo, Professor Hugo and Thomas.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, I think that's my first in terms of railways. It is very good to know that there are aspects of related to the environment and also with the urban structure that are better with railways rather than with roads. So with railways, we can somehow make stations in the villages and in the former or in towns, in the former towns, and keep the structure that existed before, and so it's more sustainable rather than a car or a road car that is, creates a little bit more urban sprawl than eventually railways. The other point is that railways also can go around. So you can go around a place that is protected, and well, it takes more 1 minute, but anyway, you can go around these protected areas. So in terms of environment, not only in terms of global warming, but also locally we can be more careful.
Yes.
Related, yeah. Now, I think that regarding globalization, well, I think we should acknowledge that in fact globalization finished anger all around the world and created a lot of interdependencies between major countries that somehow is avoiding now going to war. So I think that's, of course, it's a very unstable period with a lot of problems of equity, a lot of, but I'm afraid that if, for instance, we have a rise in protectionism in the United States, then, well, the Chinese mothers will send their children to war. So I don't, if they are unemployed. So I don't think that we should completely avoid what was going on around the world, and that's of course created. Yeah, but that's something to. So we're not. The problem with these changes in globalization that suddenly we create a break and then there is a war. So it's eventually you should try to go slowly with taxes and so on and protect the countries if they are. But anyway, there are more good news related to globalization than bad news, to my so far, although challenging. But related with the sustainability and with the rule of the game in terms of being private or public, I think the rule of the game should be that one, competition between different providers, if it is possible to submit, because we know, and not forced competition like Hugo told us that somehow the British forced the trains to go to Mumbai instead of going to Go and then create an imbalanced thing. So that's one. So to have somehow competition between the different providers, and on the other hand, related with sustainability, I discussed this 2 days ago. Well, we should look at indicators that in fact represent effort, and not targets. So if we talk about GDP per capita, we know that if it reduces, we suffer a little bit. If it increases, if we not talk about pollution in a city, we know we feel bad or feel good. If we talk about equity, there are measures that somehow everybody feels, and which, if you talk about biodiversity, is more difficult. But if you have a proxy, water cleaning, that's the word, or the cleaning of water, I think it's much better. Or pandemic, number of deaths, we were very much sensitive to the number of deaths per region and per country and so on. So that's crucial. We human beings, we are not animals. We are not organic. We don't live on targets. We live on signals from the effort. And this is something we must add to the sustainability, and it is not there. It is not there. It is just targets, and many times these indicators are to continue the rule of the game. And so it's that's the message I have. Of course, railways. One thing is one thing we must move from the existing organization of railways into the time schedule, the real accessibility, price, and so on. Otherwise, of course, our models do not work. And we know that there is a lot of improvements to make, not only in the railways themselves, but also on the management of the railways and on the quality of the carriage and so on. And this is, we should include this in the models, and then should include this on the decisions, on what's going on. So, okay, it's more about influencing the accessibility rather than and the quality, rather than to see in the map more railways, because that takes a long time. And that, yeah, finally, if you build a station, a metro station, and improves the value of that area, as we have seen in Chennai, these people must pay. So, and if we have these marginal benefit equal to the marginal cost, and people pay, then everything can be done. Most of the things that should be done are done. So, but if you think that somehow it's a public obligation to give accessibility to everybody that is in the boundaries of a city, then of course it takes more time to do it, and it takes a lot. Finally, there was a discussion here in Lisbon that the government promoted the same fare for all the cities. It's very nice at the beginning, people like very much, but of course, what is the outcome in 10 years? It is that the city will expand, and then these municipalities in more peripheral areas will produce social quarters and so on, and then these people will be these poor people will be more detached from the markets. So we know the experience. We have this experience when the average cost equals the average benefit, and so we should not commit the same mistake. Look at what is happening now in China. They want to avoid the slums that they saw eventually in India, and they create these cities that are empty. And now the world will suffer a lot because of these global bankruptcy. 92% of these cities are empty. Okay, but there were people, well, it doesn't matter, well, this money must be paid, and these people are completely bankrupt. And if you go there, it is impossible to fulfill them because there are no jobs, they are in the wrong place, and so on. So that's a good thing of India regarding China, is that in fact, although the image eventually is not so nice as it is in these empty buildings in India, I think it's going more rational, step by step, more marginal, and the evolution is going better. At least you did not commit this mistake of assuming that if you build houses, people will go there. And of course, you have slums, but the slums somehow, if you tax the porters in the slum, if you have this, okay, you must pay us one penny for your road, then we create a city. Otherwise, if you think that it is just a public obligation, well, people will wait for the city. That's this simple concept that it is in your mind since the pharaonic times, that we assume that the pharaoh should build the canals and water for everybody, and Roman times and so on. And we know that the state somehow is similar to everybody, but space, in fact, created a difference in cost and a difference in benefit. And from regional science perspective, we should tell that space justify on one hand, decentralization on one hand. On the other hand, we can see that optimal is eventually that the prices vary across space, because it's impossible to have these leveling space that everything is assumed to be one place. That conceptual mind that we we don't have yet in our mind. And that in poor countries like Portugal, we feel it because we designed a lot of motorways, and now we are in bankruptcy. So that is it is in our mind what we need to change to acknowledge that the former idea of a pharaonic state or of a central planning state or a Roman state that the city is stable is eventually not the best way to think of a city, but on the contrary, complementary to that, to have a city that space matters and that marginal space is important. Also in railway deployment and metro, of course, because the fixed cost and the marginal cost is very slow, but still this fixed cost of each link should be paid by those who benefit from this link. That's a completely different idea that people have nowadays because they think the city, because on one hand, sorry, I just finished. The city wins or the state wins by transforming rural area into urban area because there are more taxes. And so there is this stimulus to promote urban sprawl. And on the other hand, because population like to have the same right as the one that is nearby, so they don't take into account that there is this marginal cost equal to the marginal benefit, and otherwise it is a tragedy of the commons that we see all around the world. Okay, thank you.
If I may add something about the question, I usually like to bring to this discussion the historical perspective, as a railway historian so aptly puts it, Colin Duval. He says that well, railways has been serving the same needs and offering the same services since its inception in the 19th century. Of course, there are many innovations and many novelties, but at the end of the day, the point is that railways keep transporting goods, transporting people, and often using the same routes that were deployed 100 or so years ago. So therefore, I think that history can also bring a valid argument to this debate and to these questions. About globalization, railways were an important stage of globalization because they moved expertise, they moved finance, they moved laborers from all parts of the world into a single point in the work yards, and this promoted not only economic and financial exchanges, but also social and cultural exchanges. This is what Matthias Middle calls a portal of globalization. So railways acted as these portals of globalization. As for the relationship between the public and the private sector, I think that history shows that railways work better. They only work if they have a strong input from the state and from the public sector, because one of the main issues of a railway operation is the infrastructure. Infrastructure is extremely expensive to build and extremely expensive to maintain. And if the public sector does not intervene in this, especially in the infrastructure, the fares would have to be extremely high for the railway to be economically feasible. And of course, this would bring very many hardships to those commuters, to those shippers, to producers that would have to pay very high fares to commute to their works, to commute to their homes, to make tourism, to put their products in the market, and so on. And also, the public may also intervene in the operation, either by holding a public company, like happens in Portugal. But also by establishing public and public-private partnerships with other operators, in which they guarantee a part of the income to these operators in order to make the fares more accessible to all. And for instance, in the Portuguese case, we have at least 2 companies that I can recall of that operate in such bases. One is Fertagos, which operates a small line in Lisbon, between Lisbon and the southern bank of the Tagus River, and in Porto, the second major city in Portugal. The metro, the company that operates the rolling stock in the metro, is also a private company working on a private-public partnership with the state, and this allows for the fares to be, the tickets to be relatively cheap in order to increase the number of people that can take advantage of it. And finally, I think what history shows us is that, most of all, is that railways should not be regarded as a solution for all problems, and technology as a whole should not be seen as the solution for all problems. The technical fix will not solve every predicament that the humankind now faces. It will be important, of course, but it should not be considered as the ultimate means to eliminate all problems on Earth. There are other things that should matter. And of course, even when technology as railways is implemented in a given context, it has not only social, cultural consequences, it also has economic and financial consequences, and all of them should be weighed in when deciding to implement such a technology in order to maximize the efficiency and the advantages to all. Thank you.
Yeah, this was a very, very insightful points. So thanks to Professor Thomas and Professor Hugo. Thanks. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, ma'am. Thank you so much for that insightful question. We have
Can I add?
Sure.
Can I add just one point? Well, I think Hugo is very right in terms of this distinguishing between public and private, because they are different. My argument is that although the network is naturally public, but anyway, it must be paid. It must be paid by those who benefit. So in terms of if you build a network, the housing sector in that area is much more valued.
Yes.
And so there is the way you tax the value of land, not commuters, the value of land, it's crucial, because otherwise you are deploying infrastructure that somehow has no value. And that's the idea that, okay, we have this development of infrastructure, but if the value of land rises enough to pay for that infrastructure. That's one part. Then the operational part of it, where the marginal cost is very low, and that's the advantage of the railway station, the railway system. Of course, then you have the fares can be much lower, and the carriage be fully used. So I think you should distinguish this idea that the public should be paid by the taxes of all. That's for me a very dangerous idea. The taxes should be paid for those, if possible, whenever possible, for those in fact benefit. And in this case, the benefit goes from money in the metro line, goes from the areas that are benefited. So, and that's also a good measure to evaluate the cost and benefit of a new line or whatever. So it's good to distinguish too, because it is impossible to have a tax system without a public interference. But at the same time, like Samuelson said, also in the public deployment of infrastructures, the marginal benefit should be equal, the public marginal benefit should be equal to the marginal cost. Otherwise, we have networks that are empty, and then a country is bankrupt.
Thank you so much, Professor. Thank you so much for those insights. I think we had another question from Mr. Nagendra. Sir, you can go ahead with your question. Mr. Nagendra? Well, I believe we have lost connection to Mr. Nagendra. So I have one question for the panelists, for all the panelists. When we look at the involvement of regional associations, say SARC, we have European Union also, which involves itself in the railway development and railway infrastructure progress. And at the same time, we have organizations like the International Union of Railways. How do you think the regional organizations or organizations like International Union of Railways play an important role in pacing the modernization of railways to match with its competitors in the road and aviation sector? Any of the panelists can go ahead.
Well, what I know is that the design of these networks in the European Union is crucial, because most of the countries still continue to be countries. So if you look at the design of those lines, it's crucial. For example, Portugal and Spain, Portugal should be interested in connecting directly to Europe and eventually to Gibraltar. But the Spanish do not allow it. And so the Spanish won't allow this connection with Europe, but we can then, first they wanted the Lisbon-Madrid connection and then to the north. And we don't want to go to Madrid, we want to go to Europe. So now the design is not yet finished, but this, just to tell you that the design of these networks, because in fact, it highlights the new centralities or some centralities are crucial. And the borders, and you know that with Assam and Tripura there. So it's something that globalization should bring with people from diplomacy trying to grasp, because we have these negotiations in the sea, we should also have a common knowledge, a global knowledge about these networks inland, that now this Trans-Asian thing, and also the crossing of Bangladesh and so on. There is also a lot of human evolution that we should have in trusting each other that should come. Otherwise, we are in the wrong direction, because we are somehow highlighting the roles of some cities instead of the others, and avoiding the development of the interior of the country. We should distinguish very well. Sometimes it's difficult to design time. What is the public good provided by the state at different levels? What is the economy? And the economy, we learned that for some time. That's globalization. That if the economy evolves naturally, of course, it's good to have no boundaries for trade of goods and sometimes of capital, and eventually sometimes of people, if there is some capacity to integrate people that is moving around. And this new knowledge, that there's new challenges that are coming from the 20th century, we should tackle them also in terms of design of the railways. And that's, so these railways that were designed for the colonial power and somehow allowed the cities in the center of India to be more developed and to move the capital from Calcutta or from Mumbai to Delhi and so on. These ways of research should also help us to redesign the ways to Central Asia, so the crossing between Pakistan and India, the crossing across Bangladesh, and from India inland, of course, there is a very mountain area, to Myanmar and to China. And this is what I think it is a huge, it's not only technology, that's institution. International institutions, that's like for a long period, the Israelis and the Palestinians arranged with water. They don't spoil water of each other. We should not spoil transportation networks of each other, because it creates that for everybody. And this is something that United Nations, our diplomats should eventually resolve, because it's obvious that we are in the wrong path, creating barriers where they should not be. Regarding with public goods, of course, it is different. And also with defense and so on, everything is on their ways. But that has nothing necessarily to do with the trade and with flows between countries, between regions. So thank you.
Well, I may add something on that. I don't really know the insights of the organization of the International Union of Railways, but I can tell you that there is an issue in the there is the issue of cross-border railways. This was an issue in the past, and still is an issue in the present, still in Europe. Even though the European Union has made the cross-boarding easier since its inception. But I know there are some cases in Portugal. For instance, there was a company in Portugal that operated freight, and they said they could easily put merchandise from Lisbon to Berlin in 2 or 3 days' time. But the problem was that they reached the border with France, and the French authorities they didn't give the green light for the train to advance. They didn't give the train a slot in the network to advance, because they had the regional trains, they had the urban trains, they had the high-speed trains. They were all occupying the tracks, and they didn't give any slots to this freight trains. And this was the major issue, more than the break of gauge in the Spanish and the French border. And of course, nowadays we are at Portugal. We are talking about reinvesting in railways, building new railways, building high-speed trains. And actually, our minister said that one of the main railways should be one that connects Porto to the north of Spain in Galicia. And they said, oh, this will bring all merchandises to the Porto airport. The Spanish don't know it yet, but they will do this. And of course, the Spanish know this. And my question is, will they be willing to relinquish this traffic, this movement, to benefit the Portuguese port or Portuguese harbor? Of course, we are a European Union, but as Tomás said, there are also independent countries. We are still independent countries, and each of us has a different agenda. And I find it very difficult for a country to benefit another country by building a cross-border railway link and harm its own economy. So this is a tricky subject that must be dealt with in the future. I'm not sure if if the International Union of Railways is addressing this. I know that European Union is lobbying or is addressing that for the need to build more railways and more high-speed trains, mostly to meet the challenges of climate changes. But this will be a very tricky subject to address in the future.
Professor Pereira, Chitresh, if I can just ask one quick follow-up over there.
Sure, sir. Sure, sir.
Just want to gather some of your thoughts on why cooperation between certain sectors such as coal and steel in Europe was in your opinion more amenable for countries and not, let's say, the kind of cooperation that you are talking about, Portugal and Spain. And it absolutely, from a realist perspective, it makes sense that one country would not allow their traffic to be diverted to another country. How might you think, if you can throw some light on this, that some of the other sectors of the economy had incentives wherein these nations found it more in their benefit to cooperate rather than to compete as they are doing in this particular instance of railways, as you had mentioned?
Mm-hmm. Well, I had a course on European integration a few years ago. I'm not really.
Oh, that's
sure.
awesome! I've been researching on this, and that's probably going to be my own PhD topic on pathways to issue-based integration. I'm not restricting to a particular region, but yes, that's the reason why I got interested in it.
Okay, I want to say what I know from memory from that course, but I think maybe Tomás may chip in some thoughts afterwards. Well, I think that the inception of the European Union was completely different. It was in the aftermath of a war.
Yes.
People realized that it was better to cooperate than just to fight and to share resources. But I think that one thing is sharing and manufacturing resources, and the other thing is transporting them. And therefore, a railway meets different demands that the production of coal, for instance, or steel does. And I think that's the main reason why it was decided to cooperate in the production, in the abolishment of the borders. And in the case of transportation, it may be different because, well, the sharing of resources will still be available, but it's more of a means to meet national agendas without putting in danger, without jeopardizing that sharing of resources. But if I might add something more about the last question, I was meant to talk about it, but I forgot. There is a researcher based in, I think she was based in Berlin a few years ago. I'm not sure where she's based now. And she studied the transnational railway links between Asia and Europe, the Silk Road route. I think that was the name. Her name was Irene Anastasiadou. She's a Greek, but well, I can share her email with you. I think it might be
sure. I think that'll be super interesting. Yes, yes.
Well, I'll just type in the chat her mail address. Okay.
Perfect. Thank you so much. Thank you so much.
Okay, we know since Adam Smith that trade is better than non-trade. So, because there are adjustments made, and we know that in the provincial level, at the national level, of course, there are problems when there is a change, but in long term, theoretically, it's better. In reality, it's being better. But we must be aware, and our countries must know what's going on in order to negotiate. For instance, now the Brexit. They were in the European Union. Now they choose to go out. Why they choose to go out? It was the parts more integrated in Europe that went away. And somehow they were not happy with what's going on. So this type of reaction came. But why they were not happy? Because of British policy or because of the European policy? So in fact, because they were more integrated. In fact, there was a vote against the European policy regarding this type of trade. So that's I don't. Sometimes it can be a problem. People can this choice can be made by the governments of integrating or non-integrated. And theoretically, it is better, but has costs and benefits. But sometimes, as it is the case now, it is done by the public, by the people in democracy. So it's a really we should learn more about how people decide like that, and not just to blame as we are doing. Okay, this is a revolt vote. It's not a revolt vote. It's a revolt in favor of one measure against integration. And of course, there are pros and cons of integration, and railways play a crucial role. I think that, well, I don't know, have all the answers. The good thing of railways is that sometimes they can compete with sea transportation. And so if there is competition, there is lower prices and there is a better solution. So I really think that, for instance, in Spain, the competition between the different ports is very interesting, and the competition between roads and railways, it's very huge. And of course, that's this game that eventually allows a better world. But of course, changes are difficult, and in democracy, people vote and can vote against, and countries that depend on people, sometimes they behave that. But it is the role of governments a little bit to represent their own people, but to move a little bit ahead Sometimes they fail and they lost elections. Sometimes they go on time. But well, certainly the challenge of a good design, of the better design of railway system, and good management that avoid monopolies, public or private, it's a crucial point. Okay, thank you.
Thank you so much. Chitresh, over to you.
Thank you so much, sir. So that was a very insightful discussion that we had. We touched on different aspects of the railways, not just from the perspective of South Asia, but from a very global perspective, from its role in facilitating urban commute to the geographical vibrance to the management and numerous other issues that continue to grapple the railways world over. So I would like to take this opportunity to thank all the esteemed panelists, Professor Tomás, Professor Sumana, Professor Saptarshi sir, Mr. Hugo, Mr. Stabak, and of course, ARPIT sir for taking us through this insightful session and making it all the more engaging and more, curious oriented, where we got a lot more gaps to explore in the railways. And of course, last but not the least, our audience, their insightful questions did give us a lot more areas to focus on and a lot more areas to explore. So thank you all. Thank you all so much. I hope you all enjoyed this session. So with this, we come to the close of the panel discussion. And I look forward to having many more such panel discussions on railways in the future. Thank you so much, everyone. Wishing you a pleasant evening from India.
Thank you so much, everyone.
Thank you very much.
And thank you, Chitresh, for the great organization.
Thank you,
Thanks.
Sumana. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
So.